is back into it in Chester. Here's El Senior. Yes! Yes!
The center back, Jacob Glesnes, is going for it.
Oh my God! What a goal! And that will do it! One of the best comebacks in recent years. 3 unanswered by the Union. And they go into the Gold Cup break, winning it 3-2.
Hello, welcome to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd. And ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? The day we've all been waiting for since November 8th when we officially clinched the Supporters' Shield against the New England Revolution. I mean, it seems like it was forever ago that game happened in the cold. Actually, no, that day was warm, and now looks like we're going to have nothing but warm weather straight ahead, and I'm super excited because clinching that Supporters' Shield, what does it mean? It means that we finally get to play in the CONCACAF Champions League. I just can't wait. And I know all you guys listening are super duper excited. We are 2 days away, people. 2 days away. Well, like you guys have been listening since last year, usually whenever the Union will play so-and-so team, I try my best to bring on somebody to preview that because let's face it, right? I can try to do research, but it's nothing like somebody that watches a league, watches this team specifically. So I was like, okay, let's go ahead and find somebody that covers Saprissa, covers the Costa Rican league. And I'm joined by Mr. Eddie from crcfootball.com. So thanks for joining me, Eddie. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I've got to give a shout out to my man, Mike Thomas, for saying, hey, Todd, Eddie's the real deal. He knows this stuff. Get him on the podcast. And then I saw Jonathan Tannenwald give you a ringing endorsement as well. I'm like, okay, well, Mike, I trust Mike, whatever he says. And Jonathan Tannenwald, pretty big deal for all Union fans out there covering the team for the Inquiry. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I definitely got to get this guy on. And so I thank you so much, Eddie, for coming on to preview this Philadelphia Union versus Saprissa match.
Yeah, Jonathan Tannenwald, actually, he and I go a little bit way back to the days of like Jason Davis and American Soccer Morning. Him and I would go tit for tat, time for time, but it's sort of a mutual respect between the two of us. But definitely when he signed off on me, I kind of knew that my mentions would start blowing up a little bit. And I got to say, I will definitely credit anybody who covers the Union and Union fans alike, because in all the years that I've been doing this, I haven't seen a fan base as thirsty for knowledge about their opponent in CCL as you guys have. It's been nonstop. And of course, I do this stuff out of passion and love. So to see that reciprocated from my upcoming opponent, it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, man, we were looking forward to last year playing in the Leagues Cup, but then obviously COVID hit and everything. And look, everybody knows the CCL's where you want to be playing at, but we're like, we'll take the Leagues Cup, and then COVID happens. And so we were a little bit disappointed that they canceled that tournament, but still went through with the CCL. And look, I'm sure just like myself, a lot of my listeners, or maybe even people that don't even know this podcast exists, they're like, yeah, I never thought we'd see the day that the Philadelphia Union would be playing in the CONCACAF Champions League. And look, of course, they don't draw a team from Mexico. They just go on and draw the most successful team in Costa Rica. So it's not easy, right?
No, I think the Central American affair in CCL, it's a lot of unknown. Obviously, if you get a Mexican team, you're nervous, but then you get a Central American team, you feel like you have a little bit of hope. But I know that Saprissa name carries a little bit more weight, especially in American circles. It's one of the more common names that you'll come across. Mm-hmm. So it with that comes a little bit of nervousness because you know that you have a genuine powerhouse from Central America.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know the talk between all Union fans were like, please not Leon, please not Leon. And look, we didn't get Leon. And obviously you're here to talk Saprissa, and we all know that it's Saprissa. But so just for all the Union fans that are listening to this podcast and that don't know who you are, Eddie, can you go ahead and just tell us a little bit how you got into soccer and talk a little bit about crcfootball.com? Sure.
So I guess my soccer career or covering soccer, it has MLS roots. I did my time in the Navy. I got out. I started going to school and started doing some freelance work. And essentially I ended up at the MLS digital offices, but for the Opta branch. And we were the guys that collected a lot of the data and a lot of the stats, the analytics that people started to fall in love with. This was back like 2013, 2014. And I then went on to become one of the first paid columnists for Bleacher Report covering MLS. So my roots starting off were on the MLS side. And I did a few years at Opta, made my way up to become a senior analyst. I consider myself one of the top guys there. If there were ever a 30 for 30 on geeks in MLS digital offices, I would hope they would do it on us, because we have some pretty cool stories in those offices. But, I did that for a few years, and, I started getting more into the coaching side and being more on the field and player development. And that's kind of where I went with my career. But when my time at Opta ended and my time at Bleacher Report ended, I still felt this void of wanting to cover the professional game a little bit. But as MLS started going up, and I also did stuff for Liga MX at the same time, but I felt like that was already well covered. And obviously being a Tico and being misrepresented a lot, especially after the 2014 World Cup, where people felt like they knew what Costa Rican soccer was because they saw us in one World Cup. And I still felt like people needed to have more information that they were being provided. So I kind of took everything that I'd learned at Opta, everything I'd learned at Bleacher Report, and kind of put that all into the Costa Rican side and turned my Twitter account into the place that anybody can go to if you want to learn about anything Tico football, whether it's the national team, whether it's the league itself. Obviously I'm a Saprissa fan. It was something that I grew up with on my father's side because, ever since he was like 5 years old, that was his team. So it's decades and it's in my blood. But, from top to bottom, I cover all 12 teams. And if it wasn't Saprissa, if you were playing a Limon or a Grecia or San Carlos, I can tell you about them too. So just kind of taking everything that I had learned on the American side, on the Opta side, the Bleacher Report side, and just applying it to Costa Rica, it's kind of what my brand has become.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, man, especially talking about the whole analytical side of soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, because a lot of people, know that before I was doing the Philadelphia Union, I was covering Premier League soccer. And so on that show, when I was doing that, it was all these analytical stats that I was getting, and some people loved it, and some people were like, "Oh man, you're getting too nerdy on me." So on my show now, covering the Philadelphia Union, I don't try to go down that road too much because I'm like, man, I don't know if people love it or if they don't, but I love it, and I'm sure you do as well. Because if you didn't love it, you wouldn't be working for Opta, just covering all the MLS stats that I know myself love, and just to throw that into something else that you're still passionate about, Costa Rican soccer. And you're right. I mean, Central American soccer, it's different, right? It's a whole different ball game down there, and it doesn't get as much love as it probably should here in the States. But people like yourself are doing a good job covering it. We all know, obviously, Liga MX, but even that, I feel like, still doesn't get too much coverage. It's like, I'm sure you've seen this at your time and working at MLS, and not even that, just like, there's a lot of people in this country that are Euro snobs. They only care about European soccer. They don't care about MLS. They don't care about Liga MX. They don't care about the Costa Rican League. They don't care about America and North America at all. They do not care about soccer here in North America. It's like, okay, yeah, I like soccer, but I only like European soccer because that's the more superior soccer. But as I'm sure you've seen over the years, MLS is just getting stronger and stronger, and Liga MX has always been this powerhouse. And like I said in the introduction, Saprissa has just always been that team in Costa Rica.
Yeah, I think even when you consider MLS, like, just look at the finances, right? Like, you have some clubs that are going to go out and spend, but there's a lot of clubs that need to find ways to win in the margins and even in the budget. And places in Central America like Honduras too, Costa Rica, Panama, there's a lot of talent there that you can pick up on the cheap, and then maybe from there you can go on and sell on. You look at Nashville. Nashville is, as an exhibition club, they went out and they signed Randall Leal as a DP, young Costa Rican cat. You guys saw him in the Olympic qualifiers, and there's opportunities for maybe teams that don't have the wallets that some of the new flashier clubs have. Mm-hmm. You could still find a lot of value in Central America. So, having me being one of the voices, and I always get excited when I see players randomly. I'll find an 18-year-old playing for Guadalupe and just watching them play, and I kind of think like, MLS would be a good springboard for him. And these are the kind of players that MLS clubs should be looking at for depth, for value, to increase their chances to compete on a weekly basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you see the LAFC, you see the LA Galaxies going down to South America, signing players from Argentina. I know Venezuela is starting to become a hotbed. Everybody knows Brazil, but yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right that you look at young kids down in Honduras, look at kids in Costa Rica, where, they're going to take money because let's face it, the money that they get in those leagues is nothing, like you said, compared to the money that you get playing in MLS. So if an offer is good enough, they're going to take it. And yeah, it sucks. We see it here with the Philadelphia Union. Like, it sucks losing Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie. But when somebody comes in with an offer that's too good to turn down, you're going to accept it because, you invest that money back into your club, even though Union fans don't want to hear it. But, that's just how you grow the team. That's how you're eventually going to grow the league. And speaking of that, I just want to get into just like whole CCL because, like I said, for Union fans, this is a first for us. And I'm sure so many of us, this is going to be the first time that we've truly ever paid attention to this whole competition, CCL. Yeah, we know what CCL is, but how many Union fans can say that, I've watched the competition from start to finish? I'm sure not a lot. And honestly, this is my first time paying attention this much to CCL. I'm so excited because finally my team is in this. And obviously when your team's in it, you're going to pay attention. You hear crazy stories about how people go down to Central America. The environment's really, really hostile. You got fans throwing pee. You hear sometimes the pitches aren't the best conditions. We also know that MLS teams really don't fare that well in CCL play. So, Eddie, can you tell myself and the listeners just a little bit of the history about Saprissa, how they're historically been a really strong team in the competition and just the league itself?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with CCL in general. Union fans, now that you guys are really going to start to follow the competition, there's a hashtag called CCL Fever that you kind of see a lot. That started in the Opta offices with us analyzing those games 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night with a random Salvadorian team against a Mexican team. And, we kind of, as Opta analysts, we wanted to push our fun forward in social media. And it kind of took off from there. The competition itself has seen so many different versions, and it continued to change to where the point now that there isn't really a group stage. Right now, we're going straight into the knockouts, right? Like, this is where the Union are in. But for a team like Saprissa, we've been in this competition since last year. So the CONCACAF League is sort of this branched off version of it where before, if you won the league in Costa Rica, if you were a champion, you had an automatic berth to the knockouts. And for whatever reason, CONCACAF decided that they didn't want to do that anymore. And they wanted to invest more money in this other version of it called the CONCACAF League. So now everybody in Central America that wins a title that is an actual champion doesn't qualify for the Champions League. They qualify for the CONCACAF League. And the top 6 teams from that league, essentially, they get to move on to the actual tournament. So it's a completely different version that I think is going to be around until about 2023. And then they're going to start a completely different one that's going to be regionally based. But for us as Central Americans, especially, the insulting part is that we go from the automatic berths that we would have from the CONCACAF League, we're down to like 3. So it's going to be less representation from Central America and the Caribbean. I think the Caribbean might still have like their one, but there's obviously more of an emphasis and more on a focus on promoting North American soccer. The skeptic in me can obviously look at the 2026 World Cup coming up, 2023 for the new CCL. Yeah, you kind of want to promote the North American brand a little bit more. But even still, for us as Central Americans, it's a little bit insulting. And as a Saprissa loyalist, that I would call myself, it's a little bit more heartbreaking because of, as you said, our history in this competition. We are one of the few teams that actually made it to a FIFA Club World Cup. Our biggest run was back in 2005, where we actually played Liverpool in the semifinals, lost 1-0. Ended up playing the third place game. And I honestly, I can't even remember who we played. It was so long ago, but we finished third that year. And outside of a couple of Mexican clubs, we're the only one. So for us to be kind of pushed aside in these different versions of the CCL, little by little, it becomes a little bit more insulting. But, as a club, they still prioritize the tournament, and they always still try to put their best foot forward in the tournament. And that's because it truly, the international competition matters in Costa Rica. So for Saprissa, no matter where they are in the league, no matter how much they may struggle, this is a priority for them because they know they have that prestige in the competition, and they want to make sure that they keep that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, Before I got you on here, I was thinking, there's always been a debate between Union fans. I'm sure just soccer fans in general. Look, you look at I'll use the Premier League. Everybody knows the Premier League, where people are okay. If I had a choice of winning trophies, it would probably be people are going to say the league, then they'd probably say Champions League, then the FA Cup, then the League Cup. And I think it's kind of the same way here, right here in MLS. I think a lot of fans would say, yeah, I'd take an MLS Cup and then the CCL and then put the US Open Cup in there and Supporters Shield. You can flip-flop them. But myself, I want this cup. I want the CCL because theoretically, if you're winning the CCL, that means that you're the best team in North America and Central America. You're the best team. No team comes close to you. And I really, really want this competition to be the Unions. I don't know how far we'll go. We'll talk about it definitely when we go farther, but it is a prestigious competition. And yeah, obviously there is still a part of me where I would love to see somehow you could add South America to the mix, but obviously we know that's not possible at all because just the travel, the wear and tear that it would be on the body. Because look, let's face it, we all know that traveling around Europe is super duper simple, but you look at just America itself, flying from the West Coast to the East Coast, it's a toll on the body. It's not like, okay, let's get on a train, let's get on a coach bus and we can go from the north to the south and be there within an hour. No, that doesn't happen at all. And so it's you would love to add South America just to add more tougher teams to this competition to really make the CCL be even more meaningful, try to compare it to Champions League, but obviously it's not possible at all. And look, before we even think about, okay, how do you add South America to this competition to make CCL even more bigger than what it is? We got to focus on what we have. And like you said, just to eventually take Central America down to 3 spots, it is insulting, right? And especially when you look at a team like Saprissa, it makes it that much harder for Saprissa, where they're struggling a little bit. I think you'd agree with that in the league. It makes it harder for them to get there in the future. But I get it, and you get it as well. The World Cup's coming in 2026, so it's okay, we're going to change things around and see what sticks, what doesn't. But regardless, we're still going to watch CCL. We're still going to be a fan of this competition. And look, I'll be honest, I really don't know too much about Saprissa other than the fact that they fired their manager, Walter Centeno, back in February. They're winless in the last 7 matches played. Do you believe it was the right decision to fire Walter as manager? And can you explain why it's went so wrong for them in the last 7 games played?
I definitely think it was the wrong decision. So the issue with Saprissa really goes back to their rivalry with Alajuelense. So when the pandemic hit, Saprissa had its best roster that I had seen in a while. And a lot of that was with some of these young cats led by Manfred Ugalde, who eventually signed with City Football Group. He's in Belgium now. He's tearing it up. I wouldn't be surprised because of, City's ownership of a couple of clubs, if he either ends up in Girona in Spain or if he ends up at NYCFC. So having that roster, winning the title, which was, Centeno's biggest achievement, and this is coming off of winning a CONCACAF League too. He's bicampeón. And then Alajuelense kind of, after 8 years of failure, decided, you know what, we're going to go all in. And they spend money. They bring in Ian Smith. They bring in Leonel Moreira. They bring Brian Ruiz back home to Costa Rica. And these are massive signings for a Costa Rican club. But at the same time, they're also developing young talent of their own. And they build this roster that is quite possibly the most overwhelming roster I've seen in Costa Rica in probably 5 or 6 years. So they go ahead and they win the title last season, and Saprissa's response is completely the opposite of what you would expect of a big club, where your rival just embarrassed you. They finally won their first league title in 8 years, and your response is, we're going to sell some of our top players, and we're going to rely on about 10 academy signings. And that's going to be the biggest announcements that we make. And they kind of left Centeno with bare bones in the closet and expect him to compete with Alajuelense. So the way it kind of boiled down for Centeno, there was a week, I want to say it was back in February, where they had to play Alajuelense in the CONCACAF League final. Mind you, this is after Alajuelense had just bought Johan Venegas, who leads the CONCACAF League historically in goals scored. It's a 3-year tournament, but he always scores in this tournament. So they poached him off, and he has to play Ala Valencia twice in 1 week in the CONCACAF League final and then in the league itself. And he just, given with what he has, I felt Saprissa was very competitive that week. They lost 3-2 in the final. It was a great final. And then they lost subsequently in the weekend. I can't remember the scoreline off the top of my head, but it was still a competitive game. And that was kind of it for Centeno. He was let go. So they bring on Roy Myers, and, you know, he does very minor tweaks. But this is a guy that took over Saprissa 10 years ago, had a very mediocre career. He won one league title, but only won like 40% of his games in like a 3-year span. And it's kind of like the same thing is bearing out now, where it wasn't a Centeno problem, it's a roster problem. The team just isn't as good as it was even 12 months ago. And to expect this team to compete with what is clearly the class of Costa Rica right now and put that on the manager, I felt was unfair. And it's unfortunate that, you know, Centeno's a club legend. And for a lot of Costa Ricans, he was like the original Brian Ruiz type, and he kind of has like the same hairstyle. So to see that kind of fall on his feet, I felt was unfair, and it was a bit unjust. And what Roy Myers is doing now with the team it's kind of bearing out. You know, like you said, 7 games without a win. And it's more where Roy Myers is kind of throwing stuff to see if it's going to stick more than actually implementing a solution. His rotations are off. His pairings completely fluctuate week by week, game by game. You know, some of this has to do with injury. They are facing injury, but even still, when I watch them play, they'll go through like 3 different phases of play in 90 minutes. And it's sort of like, are you adjusting to the game, or are you just kind of hoping that if I, you know, drop a midfielder here between the center backs, or if I invert a winger here, that it'll work? And it never seems like it has an actual plan. It's more of prayer. And that's kind of how the results have bared out.
Yeah, definitely. So the one thing I took out of that is you guys talking about just signing a whole bunch of academy players, and I'm sure that's probably one thing that's sticking out to the listeners right now. It's kind of what the Union are going through. They sold their 2 best players last season, and Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie, to Genk and RB Salzburg, respectively. And then they signed 6 new homegrown guys, threw them into the first team, and now the Union are going through an injury crisis, which we'll hit on that too a little bit later here. But yeah, I mean, it's something that the fans are crying out for. Like, okay, look, we have money to spend. Like, it's not like, okay, we lost these guys on a free. No, we got $6 million each for Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie. But the one thing that I'm going to keep repeating on this podcast is, look, a lot of the money is going to go into the losses that the team took because of COVID, with not having concessions, not having full stadiums. It takes a massive hit on these owners with not having full stadiums to have the upkeep of the stadium. I know people are like, okay, well, if an owner can't afford to keep a stadium open because of the upkeep and everything, or if you're not going to spend this money when you clearly have it, then sell the team. But it's like, yeah, it's so easy to say. And look, COVID took a big hit, and you're not seeing a ton of signings like you usually do in MLS, and a lot of that money is going into the team to just make up for the losses. It's going to go back into the academy, and then I've been saying, okay, look, you get $12 million for these 2 players. At best, you're going to have $3-4 million you spend on new players. And the Union, yes, we know, haven't come close at all spending that money for the 2 signings that they've got in Stuart Finley and Leon Flack. But fans still want more, and I get it. I want more myself as well, but it's just not happening. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen in the summertime. I think Ernst Tanner was really, really spot on with what he said in his last week press conference. He basically hinted, he's like, okay, look, we're signing players for positions of need. We're signing them for depth. And yes, I know that we need a number 10. We need a striker. But if we're going to get them, he's like, we can make moves in the summertime where there's going to be some interesting players available in the summertime. Because let's face it, look, when our leagues are thick and fast and everything in the summertime, it's when these European clubs are on break and everything. Their seasons come to an end, and now their players are on holiday, and then the leagues don't really start to pick back up until July. And in June, that's when I feel like MLS is in the thickest things. And so I've been saying, look, that's great that we've signed 2 players, but I really don't expect us to sign anybody else until the summertime, if we sign anybody else. And Ernst Tanner's right. I mean, look, not only is MLS affected by COVID, You have all the European teams that are affected by it. You have teams in Central America, which I would argue are probably hurting more than what the Union are hurting right now, because look, there's 12 teams, like you said, in the Costa Rican League, and there's 27 now in MLS. The money is a lot higher in MLS right now than it is in Costa Rican. So yeah, we're hurting for money, but you guys, I'm sure, are just hurting even more down there. And so I just want to go ahead and talk about some players that fans may or may not be familiar with, which they should be. I mean, you have Kendall Watson, who we know used to play for the Whitecaps and FC Cincinnati. That's a guy that some Union fans were saying over the winter time, this would be a great signing for the Union. Yeah, he wouldn't start, but he would be a nice backup, and he eventually went back to Saprissa. You have Christian Bolaños, who used to play for the Whitecaps as well. David Guzman, who played for Portland Timbers and Columbus Crew. And then, I don't know how many people know this, right? Former Bethlehem Steel player Walter Cortez also played in the Union's academy, and then he left the Steel and went back to Saprissa. Jim Curtin has mentioned in the last couple press conferences that him and his staff know so much more about the Costa Rican League. They know about Saprissa in particular a lot more than they did. And look, I'm sure all the research that Jim Curtin and his staff have done, all the scouting that they've done, it's much more than any of us fans could have ever have done. And like I said, I just mentioned some players that fans should be familiar with, but who, in your opinion, are some players, key players for Saprissa that the Union and fans should be paying attention to?
Well, first, it sounds like I should be having a beer with your manager, because that's the kind of guy I want to talk to.
Yeah.
So, Kendall Watson, let me start with Kendall Watson, because I know you guys know him, but I just want to say this. When they were talking about signings for Saprissa and they were bringing his name up, and he was also rumored with another club in Costa Rica, I didn't feel like he was a need for us, because we had just signed in Argentina of our own, Espindola. And Espindola, for me, it's turned out to be not what I thought he was. So I'm really glad we brought Watson, because I felt Watson can still play at the MLS level, and he's shown as much coming back to Saprissa. So I will say that was a major bonus for us that I wouldn't have expected. In terms of names that you guys may not know, there are a few youngsters to look out for. The first one, depending on what mood Roy Myers is in with starting him, which is another problem that I have with him, is this kid, Jimmy Marin, who was with the U23s for Costa Rica. He is I think he's definitely the most dynamic winger that they have. Very confident kid, loves to go 1v1 on the wing, loves to play one-touch football, kind of plays a touch quicker than a lot of his counterparts just because of how he reads the game. This was a kid that in the Gold Cup, I believe it was 2019, kind of left the camp because he wanted to finalize a signing in Europe at a club in Israel, and then got suspended from the national team for 6 months. So ironically enough, he was suspended by the coach that eventually, I'm not going to say his name because I can't stand him, but he was suspended by the coach that eventually quit being Costa Rica's national team coach because he was quote unquote bored and didn't know that coaching national teams would be bored. But this was a kid that went to Israel. He was with a club. I can't pronounce it, but it was like Bir Shoeva. And they were trying to make a European League, a Europa League qualification run. And they came very close. And Marin was a pretty decent part of that. But then after they didn't qualify, he kind of fell by the wayside in the league run. And eventually Saprissa just brought him in on loan. And they haven't fully bought his contract out. That might come at the end of the year. But he's definitely a player that you guys, if he starts, we never know with Roy Myers, but if he starts, he's definitely one to look out for because he can cause any fullback problems. When Atlanta United actually played in CCL a couple years back, I think it was 2018, they played against Herediano. This is when he was at Herediano at the time. He torched him in the first leg. Against Atlanta United, he was the best player on the pitch, and I think at that time he was only 20 or 21. And I think he's only gotten better since then. But for whatever reason, he's not getting the consistent minutes that he should. There's a right back, Jordy Evans, that we have. That's a youngster that's started to come up. He didn't play today because of yellow card accumulation, but he's a very quick, pacey right back that is great in transition, which is going to be key if Saprissa is going to try and play on the front foot. And if they get caught out in transition, he's the guy that can make incredible recovery runs and keep up with anybody. One thing you'll notice with Saprissa, kind of front to back, they're old. There are a lot of 30-year-old players, be it at center back with Watson and midfield with Barantes and Guzman, and then, you know, even up top as you start to get towards Mariano Torres and wherever Angulo kind of drifts, and you have Bolaños. There are a lot of old players on this roster, so there's not a lot of young players who can kind of stretch the field, who can cause problems physically. And, you know, I watch MLS a lot. It's way more physical than the Costa Rican league is. So I know that these skill sets are going to be important. And for Saprissa, they really only have two. And I would say it's Jamie Marin and it's Jordi Evans.
Wow. So, okay, I'm sure, you know, some of my listeners, myself included, we're starting to get a little bit of an idea what we could potentially expect for this game against Saprissa. It's not what I was expecting, and I'll get to listener questions in a little bit, but I would think that you would come here and say, yeah, the whole team's physical, but you're saying only two players, so yeah, definitely caught me by surprise with that. But I was looking at former players that used to play for Saprissa, and we were talking about some players that used to play for Saprissa, they left, and now they came back. But one player that, you know, I had high expectations for, and I'm sure you did too, was Joao Campbell. When he left Saprissa back, I think, in 2011, went to Arsenal, and then he just never made it at Arsenal, went a whole bunch of loan stints around Europe, and then he eventually made his way, I think now he's at Lyon. Was there any talk that he could potentially come back to Saprissa after seeing so many ex-players for Saprissa leave and then eventually come back?
There was some chatter, but I kind of feel like it was sarcastic from a few of the broadcast social media accounts. So the like Chedemas or FUTV, the guys that cover the league itself, they would kind of like hint things out, but it felt very silly season-ish. So I never, you know, it would have been a pipe dream, but even for Joao, I felt like it would have been a bad move for him. So I'm glad he didn't come back. I feel like he still has something to prove being in North America. Maybe he finds his way back to Europe, but I still think he's maybe, you know, 3-4 years away from coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, that's a guy that I remember when he was at Arsenal, I was like, ooh, who is this guy? This guy has speed, he has good technical skills, and for whatever reason, just couldn't make it in Europe. And Arsenal sent him out on loan, and then I know he eventually got bought. I forget who bought him in La Liga, but then whatever team that bought him, then he went out on loan again, and then eventually found his way in Lyon, which Liga MX, we know it's not a bad league at all. But for a guy, I believe he's 28, 29 maybe. Yeah, I do believe that he still has a little bit to offer. So you're just doing a little bit of research, seeing that it is pretty cool, seeing how you guys eventually sell people, but then when they come near the end of their career, or maybe when they still have something to prove, they come back to Saprissa. So I was like, okay, I wonder if Joao Campbell, how serious he would entertain a thought going back to Saprissa, but like I said, he's at Lyon now, so that's neither here or there. But the Union, like we've known for a little bit now, they have no strikers due to injuries for this upcoming game against Saprissa. Corey Burke is still out with a groin injury. He has not practiced at all in preseason. Sergio Santos is out with a toe injury, has not practiced at all, really, because of that. Jack DeVries is in concussion protocol, one of our young homegrown players who is looking to get some serious minutes this season. Kasper Szabelko, our Polish striker, he's been having back spasms, and he got an injection in his back last Wednesday, so he couldn't play in that friendly against DC United. Jim Curtin did say in his press conference that he hopes with that injection that Kasper will be available for this game against Saprissa, but again, you just never know with back spasms, something can act up, and Jim Curtin say, okay, yeah, we're not going to risk it. And for the Union, for you, if anybody that's listening that's a fan of Saprissa, if they don't know, the Union, they run a 4-4-2 diamond formation, and Jim's mentioned a lot of young players are going to be making their debuts against Saprissa. He said, look, this isn't ideal, but with the injuries that we have, it just has to happen, and the players have to be brave. And I guess fortunate for the Union is going down to Saprissa, I don't believe there's going to be any fans in the stadium, so they're not going to have that hostile environment that stadium usually has, so that's a plus for the Union. Jim was also mentioning that he likes Jamiro Montero in the number 10 position. He normally plays as an 8. He's more of a box midfielder for us, but he can create as well. But Jim just kept talking about, Jameer is at his best when he's playing in the number 10 position, when we're playing meaningful games, big games. And so I fully expect that Jameer Montero, because Jim Curtin's saying that's going to be playing in the number 10. Ideally for me, a lineup's probably going to look like Andre Blake, our normal starting goalkeeper, Kai Wagner, our German left back, Jack Elliott and Jacob Lesnes, our two center backs, and then Olivier Mbizo, who just came back from the Cameroon national team. Hopefully he's fully fit, because he missed the last couple training sessions, the friendlies, because he went away with the Cameroon national team. Didn't make any appearances for them, but there is talks too that Nate Harriel, who is another one of our young homegrown players, could potentially play that right back spot instead of Mbizo. Those guys are going to go back and forth this year to fight it out for that spot, since Ray Gaddis, our normal right back, surprised everybody and retired before the season started. And then in the diamond, you'll see El Brujo, our Venezuelan center defensive midfielder, play there, protect the back line. You have Ali Bedoya, our captain, on the right of the diamond. I believe another young homegrown player that we just signed this season that's going to come in is Jack McGlynn. And then we'll see, like I said, Jameer Montero as the number 10, even though I think personally he's better at the 8. But just listening to Jim in his press conference talk about, okay, Montero's so good in the 10 when it's big games, I fully expect Jameer to play the number 10 role. And then that means Anthony Fontana, who is more of a number 10, but can play as a second striker. We've seen him play there a couple times. Fontana and Sullivan, another one of our new homegrown signings, who is not a natural striker. I believe those two guys are going to be our strikers up front. So it's going to be a lot of inexperience in this lineup for us. A lot of guys, like Jim Curtin said, are going to be making their debuts in a competition that you normally would not be throwing a young player in. But because every single striker for the Union is out, that's what I'm expecting for the Union. I won't give my prediction yet. I'll go ahead and listen to you speak some more. But what kind of lineup can you expect Saprissa to put out?
So I guess I'll start with the Spider-Man meme, where they're kind of just pointing at each other, because we have the same problem at striker. Ironically enough, Ariel Rodriguez was probably our biggest off-season signing. This is a guy that I can't remember if he went to Vietnam or Thailand. I just, at this point, there's so many random Costa Ricans that go to these random Asian countries. I can't remember which one they went to.
Yeah.
But he came back this season, and he's dealing with a knee injury that kept him out of now the last 2 games. And I was actually watching the build up to today's game, and the assistant coach actually mentioned that, it's his recovery is coming along well, but they're actually more optimistic that he'll play in the second leg. He basically mentioned. So he didn't even mention the first leg as a possibility. So now your top striker's out. Orlando Sinclair was a guy that had stepped in for Rodriguez, because this is now his second injury of the season. He had stepped in for him before and did remarkably well, but he's dealing with kind of like a quad muscular injury of his own. And the communication of it is very vague in terms of if it's day to day. They're really not playing their hand there. I really can't get a read on if he's available for Wednesday or not. So I'm hopeful that he is, but I was kind of planning on him not being there, which kind of brought me to, all right, well, they have this other young academy signing that they brought in, K. Mark Davis, and he was brought on today in like the 75th minute along with Jimmy Marin, which kind of led me believe, all right, Roy Myers did a lot of rotation today, so bringing these kids on late, it's obviously to get them a little bit of rhythm, because these two are probably going to start on Wednesday. 3 minutes later, after I tweet that, K. Mark Davis is out with an injury, and he's carted off. And Saprissa had to finish with 10 men against Cartago, who already had 10 men because their striker just kind of like wrestled somebody down to the ground. It's a wild game. But we're basically like 3 strikers down. And this isn't a problem that's foreign to us. We've found ways to kind of handle it. I would say our system is more of a 4-3-3, where our goalkeeper is going to be Adam Cruz, and he's very spotty with his feet, but his reflexes are pretty strong. And I think that he'll turn the ball over a lot, and he'll make some errant passes, maybe not on the ground, but more in the air, I would say, where he just randomly kicks the ball out of bounds when he's under no pressure. But pretty good as a shot stopper. Our fullbacks, I would imagine, like I said, Jordy Evans as our right back. He's one of our younger talents and one of the guys who can really go wing to wing. The interesting part for me would be what we do at left back, because we kind of have 2 different approaches. And We have a real left back in Luis Jose Hernandez, who was part of a U23 squad. But what I've noticed, what Roy Myers has done in a lot of the big games, is that he'll play Aubrey David, who's like a 28-year-old Trinidadian, and he'll play him at left back, but he's more of a center back, and it's really more there because he's pretty good going 1v1 on the outside, and it's more for that than anything he can do in attack. So I'm curious to see, do we go with two real fullbacks who are going to push the width and push the depth, or are we going to be a little bit more pragmatic at home and play somebody like Aubrey David? I'd imagine the center back pairing, it's definitely going to be Waston. You'll see Waston out there. And then it's really going to come down to Espindola and David. It could be, if David is not at left back, he'll play center back. If not, Espindola would take his spot. Midfield is where it starts to get a little bit tricky because David Guzman actually came off injured today. Late in the second half, he had gone down and they carted him off. They kind of looked at him a lot on the sideline, got up, came back on the field, and then he was subbed off a minute later, but still walked off of his own volition. So I can't tell if that was, it's still too early to tell. I can't tell if that was more of a precaution because they know what's coming up on Wednesday, or if he was genuinely hurt. Yeah. But, even if he can't go, you have a guy like Michael Barantes who could step in, Esteban Rodriguez who could step in. So in terms of depth in midfield, you'll see some combination of two kind of like holding mid types, in either a combination of Barantes, Guzman, and Rodriguez. And then in front of them, kind of like two playmaking types, the captain Mariano Torres, who's an aging Argentine, and then Marvin Angulo, who, ironically enough, I've seen his name in the past kind of linked to the Union. Okay. In terms of, but it never really bared out. But that's kind of like your three midfield in a 4-3-3, and then out wide is where it starts to get tricky because of the striker position. Yeah. Colindres didn't play today because of a red card suspension. You figure he'll be back. In situations like this, he's been the one that's been deployed as the 9 because between him and Bolaños, he's the one who can stretch the field. He's the one who can stretch the defense. He's a bit pacier than Bolaños is at this point. So you can see him at the 9, Bolaños to his right, and Jimmy Marin to his left inverted, which causes a lot of problems because when Jimmy Marin cuts in and he's on that right foot, he can do a lot of damage, either feinting and then hitting it on the far post or trying to go 1-2 with whoever's playing the 9 and make that run in behind. So ideally, I would like to see something like that where it's Colindres and then Bolaños on the wing and Jimmy Marin on the left. But with the amount of rotations I've seen with Saprissa over the last couple of weeks, it's very difficult to tell what Roy Myers is thinking at this point because I've seen everything. Yeah. And whenever I see a starting 11, I can tell myself, I can see this playing 3 different ways. I'll put out what I think it starts as. For the most part, it's right. And then about halfway through the game, one of the 2 things that I also could have seen also bears out because Roy Myers is just like, let's just flip this and just wipe it out and let's do this now. So, the system should remain somewhat the same. I think the personnel is still very much up for grabs because we don't know what the health is, and Roy Myers is the wild card here.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and I'm just assuming that we're going to run our 4-4-2 diamond. Look, we could go with just Anthony Fontana as the number 9 and completely change the midfield up, but that's what we've been running throughout preseason. That's what we run the last couple of years, and so I've got to imagine that. Look, if we're running it with Sullivan and Fontana up top as the strikers, you've got to imagine that Jim Curtin's going to be running this formation against Saprissa. Honestly, look, even with, it sounds like there's going to be, neither one of these teams are at their full strength, right? Both are missing key strikers, key players, it sounds like. The goalkeepers sound a little bit like the same. Andre Blake's careless at times with his feet. Good shot stopper, but at the same time, gives the ball away cheaply, too much for me at times. He was better last year, but still, he has them in him every once in a while. It's like, who are you kicking it to, Andre? I think just with so much uncertainty with these guys, look, you guys have been playing for a while now, and the Union are just started up at the beginning of February, preseason. They've been playing friendlies against people, but look, that doesn't really, you can't compare that to playing actual meaningful games like Saprissa are playing. And because of that, look, I hear what you're saying, that there's a lot of injuries and everything, a lot of uncertainty with the starting 11. But I do think the Union are going to go down there in Costa Rica and lose this game 1-0. I could potentially see 2-0, and you could say, yeah, you're wrong because of the form that Saprissa's on. But yeah, I think the Union are going to have a tough time scoring against Saprissa, and then listening to you say, yeah, there's a lot of older players on this team. Well, yeah, they might not move as fast as some of these younger players, but you know what they have? They have experience. They have experience that these young players have not had before, and so they're going to use that experience to their benefit. And I think because of that, the Union, yeah, they might try to outrun Saprissa, but look, experience, in my opinion, trumbles as like it doesn't matter how fast you are. Experience is you can't duplicate that at all. And so because of that, I can see the Union going down to Costa Rica, like I said, losing either 1-0 or 2-0. Thoughts on the first leg?
See, this is kind of where I got myself in trouble because I've been talking to a lot of Union fans and people covering the Union themselves, and I've heard a lot of the same things. When the draw first came out, I went off of what I knew.
Yeah,
this Saprissa team isn't what they used to be. This is easily the weakest Saprissa team that I've seen in probably a decade, and this Union team just won the Supporters Shield.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I started in MLS, but I really haven't watched MLS in about 2-3 years. Mm-hmm. Trying to get into it now with Inter Miami. We'll see how that sticks because that franchise is a bit of a dumpster fire right now. I just like I like the pink. But the more I kept hearing this from people who cover the Union, the more I started to talk myself into it. And then, I had done an interview the other day and I was asked for a prediction and I just went for it. I said, you know what? We do have experience. We do have midfielders who are past their prime, but they've been here before and they know how to do this. And as you said, there aren't going to be any fans. I felt like if there were fans, that would be a huge advantage absolutely. Because when La Cueva rocks, it rocks and it literally shakes. And if you're in the visiting dressing room, you can feel it crumbling on top of you because that's where the Barra Brava stands. And you can feel the supporters breathing on you. And for, a teenager to be there, that's intimidating. The pitch is going to play well. It's very well kept grass. It's the best pitch in Costa Rica, so you don't have to worry about that. But it is going to feel like a scrimmage. The COVID protocols in Costa Rica are pretty serious. Saprissa themselves have been fined multiple times by the league because they celebrated too closely when they scored goals. And you're going to play in a very safe COVID environment, but that takes away a huge advantage that Saprissa would have. I want to stick to my original prediction where I would agree with you that Saprissa, they win 1-0, 2-1. But it's really hard for me to shake what I've seen the last 7 games and not having the guarantee that Jimmy Marin is going to start. That weighs heavily on me because to me, I think it's abundantly clear that he's their best attacking option. And to limit him to 30 minutes in a game that actually matters, that has repercussions. So I'm kind of torn because I want to remain consistent and yeah. I think it was Duke by the River that I was on, and I want to remain consistent with my pick. But I feel like that's my emotional side tugging at me, and I kind of just want to throw that out the window. And I'll say a draw on the first leg. Give me 1-1.
Hey, I'll take that. I will definitely take a draw. The Union going down to Costa Rica, scoring an away goal, I will take that. And you're absolutely right. Like, if you guys had fans down here, I think most Union fans could admit it that we would probably lose 3-4, even if we had a fully fit team. Because, look, we talked about at the beginning of the podcast how Saprissa is historically one of the best teams in this competition and in Costa Rica. Look, you talked about all the injuries. You talked about how this is, in your opinion, one of the worst Saprissa teams you've seen in the last decade, but nothing beats having a packed stadium. Nothing can beat having a packed stadium in Champions League when these fans really get into it. Like, okay, yeah, we got this team that thinks they're hot stuff from Philadelphia coming in here thinking, okay, they won the Supporters Shield. Let's show them how we play soccer down here in Costa Rica. And so that's a huge win for Philadelphia Union, not to go down there and have fans breathing on their neck. But I want to get to 3 listener questions that people left me on Twitter. First, I'll stick with Mike Van Sant. He said, should we expect this match to be very physical? If so, do you think this will help or hurt El Brujo's play? Obviously, the El Brujos to me. And I guess you already talked about it a little bit, that you guys only have two physical players. So are you still sticking with, okay, this isn't going to be a very physical match? Because I'll tell you right now, with young players, I don't, especially not having Sergio Santos, who's one of our more physical strikers, and Corey Burke as well. The only player that I can see playing physical for us is El Brujo, who has a tendency to get too many fouls, can walk a tightrope and potentially get your red card. Does it hurt him? I mean, look, you can't change players from being physical. It's in their nature. They're going to be physical. Yeah, you can coach them and say, hey, be careful. But you can't bring that out of them. So if the Saprissa players aren't going to be physical, then I can see El Brujo maybe not going in there with reckless challenges. Ali Bedoya is another one who gets away with some stupid fouls, but I feel like his fouls are a lot more tactical than El Brujo just going in there as the number 8. Like, okay, I'm going to crunch your leg, win the ball back at all costs. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Eddie? Do you think it's going to be physical?
I definitely think any set piece or dead ball situation, keep your eye on Kendall Waston, because he's going to knock somebody on their ass. Yep. Like that. I think that's a guarantee. What I would have liked to have seen would have been El Brujo against David Guzman, because I'm pretty sure that at any point in the game, we could have just seen them in hockey style, just throw the gloves down, knock each other out, and let's go 10v10 for like the next 60 minutes or something. I think if Guzman is out, it kind of changes the midfield a little bit, because Angulo and Torres are very technical players, and they're not going to rely on their physicalness as much as they're going to rely on their technical skill. I could see somebody like El Brujo kicking Angulo all over the field, and then somebody like Michael Barantes really getting in his face over it. But I at the same token, I think a guy like Mariano Torres, as technical as he is, he's the captain, and this is a guy that will retaliate if he feels like he needs to. He's very good for a yellow and knows how to pick his spots on when to take it. So as much as I don't think that's Saprissa's style, I feel like there are certain personnel and certain moments that you can look for where if it starts to become kind of a head game, and if the match is really tight and they kind of want to pull somebody like El Brujo out of his skin and kind of make him to make a mistake, I kind of feel like Saprissa's gamemanship and their experience in this competition is really going to show in those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a key right there. And some teams on MLS have picked up on it. Like, yeah, this guy's a little bit of a hothead. And to his credit, as the season went on, he controlled his emotions. But still, it takes one player to get under his skin. And he could be a walking red card, as Junior fans know. But the last two questions, kind of the same thing from Cody and Evan. They asked, how deep is this Saprissa squad? We already talked about that, but they both want to know, just could fatigue factor into the Saprissa squad at all, with this being their third match in 7 days and just with them not being in great form? So just what are your thoughts? Could fatigue really impact the way that Saprissa play in this first leg?
I think not having Colindres and Evans play today is huge, because I think they'll get big minutes on Wednesday. I think that Jimmy Marin saw very limited minutes is huge. K. Mark Davis healthy would have been nice. If Sinclair can come back, he may not be match fit, but he's a guy that's pretty physical. His young body, he can handle it. So I think in terms of depth, there are a couple of kids that in these moments where there's been some rotation, they've been able to take opportunity of it. The one that stands out the most is Fabricio Aleman, who's played significant minutes, I would say, in the last two to 4 games. So there is some depth in specific positions, and it's disheartening that the one that they really didn't have depth at is the one where they're hurting the most, which is center forward, where they're kind of down on their luck, and that's starting to tug away at their depth on the wing, which I felt like they were strong. They have depth on the wing, they have depth in midfield, they have depth at center back, and I would say one wild card that can fit in here is a right back, Ricardo Blanco, who didn't play today, and he can kind of fit anywhere on that back line if need be. He can play inverted on the left. So if Saprissa finds himself in the pinch, there are some players that they can call on to play on roles that if you look them up like on Transfer Market, you'd be like, well, what the hell is this guy doing here? But if you watch them, you can kind of see where they can fit in. And I feel like they are playing a lot of matches. I don't think that it'll hurt as much in this leg as much as it might in the return leg. I think that's if they don't get healthy in time for that second leg, I feel like that's where it's going to start to matter most.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the one thing I know is just talking to you here for going on to an hour is both teams have injuries. These teams seem very, very similar with the ways that the goalkeepers play. Not normally a physical team, but can be physical at times, and just not having strikers. That's always fun, right? You need somebody to put the ball in the back of the net, and with both teams not having their starting strikers, should make for an interesting game. But I would love your prediction of 1-1 to go into Subaru Park with an away goal. But I don't know. I'm not confident. I don't think it's going to happen. But Eddie, I've had a blast having you on the podcast, just learning more about Saprissa, learning more about the Costa Rican League, about CONCACAF Champions League as a whole. And so before I let you go, can you go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you on social media?
Sure. So my Twitter is at CRC Football, FUTBOL. That's where I do a huge majority of my work. I have the blog that I do, that's crcfootball.com. That's really more for when I want to write like long form stuff or things that I truly believe in. I don't like to do evergreen pieces. That's really not my style of coverage. But, Twitter, whenever there's a game on that I really want to follow in the league, I'll definitely do my analysis there. I try to incorporate a lot of different things that I've learned along the way, be it coaching or just opt analysis. I don't like to do the mundane, hey, 35th minute, this guy shot it and it went out of bounds. You're not going to learn anything from that. So if you're following me on Twitter, I try to keep it light. I try to keep it fun. I like to pick on Mexican fans a lot when I get the little bit of Centenario in me. But for the most part, it's a lot of analysis on a league that you don't know and hopefully you fall in love with.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that, like I said, Mike Thomas reached out and seeing Jonathan Tannenwald retweet your tweet. And this is definitely an account that you guys want to be paying attention to because Eddie, like you guys just heard, is full of knowledge. But if you guys aren't following the podcast on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow at Free Kick Pod. Check out the website, thefreekickpodcast.com. Wherever you get your podcasts, The Free Kick, Todd Lewis. And as always, guys, I remember that 2021 Philadelphia Union giveaway, jersey giveaway is going on until April 17th. So that is the day that the Union play Saprissa on the second leg. So if you want a jersey, you guys know there's 3 ways to enter, which they are. Leave a 5-star review. That gets you 2 entries right there. Leave a screenshot on the Twitter post. Number 2, you got to tag a friend on the post. And then 3, you have to retweet the tweet, and both of those get you 1 each. And to be eligible, you have to be following the Twitter account at Free Kick Pod. But Eddie, like I said, I've learned so much having you on this podcast here for the last hour, and definitely going to pay attention to what Saprissa do a little bit more in the league when the Union play them in the second leg, and hopefully the Union have something to play for in the second leg. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.